It waited in the darkness behind plaster and laughed for 30 years. Undisturbed, forgotten, a secret held captive within the walls of an ordinary house on a quiet street. Not gold, not jewels, something far more chilling. A single sheet of brittle paper, bearing the innocent marks of a child's crayon. At first glance, just a drawing, a blue house, a smiling sun, a happy family. But lean closer, closer. Let your eyes adjust to the faded wax. See the small figure lying unnaturally still in the grass, marked with crude, final X's. Notice the dark splash of insistent red beside it. And there, lurking at the edge of the crudely drawn woods, a shadowy figure watches, faceless yet radiating menace. This wasn't just misplaced artwork. It was a map to a buried nightmare. A child's silent scream, finally unearthed during a home renovation, and a cryptic clue that would unravel a decades-old disappearance, exposing a truth far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The moment that wall came down, a long-dormant horror began to stir. For Liam and Chloe, the house on Chestnut Lane represented not just a purchase, but a promise. They'd stretched their finances thin, pooling every penny of savings to secure the keys to the sprawling, slightly dilapidated property on the edge of Oakhaven. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, a place where history felt less like a record and more like a quiet accumulation of dust in undisturbed corners. Their new home reflected this perfectly. Liam, ever the spreadsheet-minded engineer, saw the challenges immediately. The way the porch roof sagged precariously at one corner, the rattling protest of the original window panes against the autumn wind, the faint, persistent scent of mildew emanating from a basement. He mentally tallied repair costs, his brow furrowed with pragmatic concern. Chloe, however, moved through the echoing rooms with a different kind of vision. As a graphic designer, she saw beyond the peeling floral wallpaper and the water-stained ceilings. She saw composition, potential, the play of light through the grimy bay window in the living room. She imagined warm gatherings in the formal dining room, its chandelier coated in a thick layer of dust like preserved history. She pictured herself curled up with a book on the wide landing upstairs, bathed in afternoon sun. "It has character, Liam," she'd insisted, running a hand over the surprisingly smooth, dark wood of the main staircase banister. "Real history. We just need to uncover it." They were young, brimming with a specific kind of optimistic exhaustion that comes with first-time homeownership, ready to pour their energy and dreams into these old walls, unaware of the secrets already contained within. Their initial focus landed on a small, awkward room tucked away upstairs, adjacent to the master bedroom. Its walls were painted a depressing, faded mustard yellow, and the space was barely large enough to hold more than a single bed and a small dresser. Perhaps it served as a nursery decades ago, Chloe mused, or maybe a lonely sewing room. Its last occupant seemed to have used it simply for forgotten storage, judging by the lingering scent of mothballs and dust. Chloe envisioned it transformed. Crisp white walls, sleek floating shelves for her design books and portfolio, maybe even a small, angled skylight carved into the roof to flood the cramped space with natural light. It would be her sanctuary, her home office. The demolition fell to Liam, armed with safety goggles, a sturdy crowbar, and a thermos of strong coffee. He set to work on the stubborn plasterboard walls. The rhythmic crunch and tear of the old material filled the air, mingling with a thick, powdery dust that coated everything, carrying the dry, stale smell of enclosed decades. He worked with determined energy, prying away large sections, exposing the dark, rough-hewn wooden laths beneath, the skeleton of the old house. Progress felt good, tangible. Then the sound changed. Mid-swing, his crowbar didn't meet the brittle resistance of plaster or the hollow echo of empty space between studs. Instead, it connected with a dull, muffled thud, something soft, yielding. Liam froze, his arms still raised. He lowered the crowbar slowly, frowning. What was that? He tapped the area gently with his knuckle. Definitely not solid wood. Not loose insulation either. Something packed in there. Carefully, switching ends of the crowbar, he used the claw to gently flake away the surrounding plaster, peeling it back like fragile skin. Behind the crumbling plaster, nestled snugly in the dark cavity between two thick, aged wooden studs, was a small, shadowed recess. Dust motes swirled lazily in the narrow beam of his headlamp. He reached a tentative hand into the opening, the fine, cool dust coating his glove. His fingers brushed against something thin, yielding, folded multiple times. Paper. He grasped it gently and pulled it free from its hiding place. It emerged into the light, a single sheet, deeply yellowed, stiff and brittle at the creases, covering the fine gray shroud of its long entombment within the wall. "Chloe," Liam called out, his voice slightly muffled by the dust mask covering his nose and mouth. "You need to see this." Chloe appeared in the doorway moments later, wiping a smear of plaster dust from her cheek with the back of her hand. Her hair was tied back, escaping strands framing her curious face. "Find the hidden stash of gold bars," she teased, stepping carefully over the debris littering the floorboards. She peered over his shoulder as he carefully unfolded the fragile paper on a relatively clean patch of the subfloor. The unfolding revealed the unmistakable work of a child. Thick, waxy lines of crayon depicted a scene both familiar and unsettling. A bright blue house sat under a radiant yellow sun, its chimney puffing out cheerful, looping smoke. Vibrant green grass covered the lower half, populated by stick figures. Two larger figures, hand in hand, clearly represented parents. A smaller figure stood beside them, innocuous enough, childhood artwork, tucked away and forgotten. Almost. Chloe knelt beside Liam, her initial lightheartedness quickly fading as her designer's eye took in the details. "Oh, that's kind of sweet," she began, her voice trailing off as she looked closer, her brow furrowed. "Hang on a second." She pointed to the right side of the page, toward the edge where crudely sketched trees formed a border suggesting woods. Another small stick figure lay prone on the grass, distinctly separate from the standing family unit. Its arms were splayed wide, its legs stiff and straight. And right beside it, a heavy, deliberate patch of dark red crayon, scribbled with an intensity that belied the surrounding cheerfulness. "Is that blood?" Chloe whispered the word, a sudden, unexpected chill prickling her skin despite the stuffy air in the room. Liam leaned in, squinting through his goggles. "Could be anything," he offered, trying for reassurance. "Jam? Red paint? Kids draw all sorts of weird stuff, Chloe. Remember your nephew's drawing of the dog with 6 legs?" He attempted a chuckle, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. The way the figure lay, the starkness of the red, it felt wrong. "Maybe," Chloe conceded uncertainly, her gaze drifting. "But look over here, too." Her finger traced the edge of the drawn woods, settling on a shape partially obscured behind the thick trunk of the largest tree. Another figure stood there, taller than the family figures, rendered primarily in black and dark brown crayon. It wasn't just a stick figure. It seemed distorted. Its head was disproportionately large, almost circular, its limbs thin but somehow rigid, menacing. Its posture suggested observation, a hidden watcher. It seemed to be looking directly toward the house, towards a small family, towards a figure lying still on the grass. Who is that supposed to be? Her voice was barely audible now, laced with dawning unease. Liam shrugged, pushing his goggles up onto his forehead, forcing a casualness he didn't genuinely feel. The drawing suddenly seemed less like a discovery and more like evidence of something unpleasant, probably just imagination running wild. The boogeyman. Maybe the kid who drew this had nightmares. He reached down, intending to carefully fold the paper back up, perhaps set aside on a dusty windowsill, something to be dealt with later, maybe even discarded with the rest of the construction debris. "No, wait." Chloe stopped him quickly, placing her hand gently over his. Her touch was cool. "Don't. Not yet." She carefully lifted the fragile sheet herself, handling it as if it might crumble into dust. "There's something really off about this, Liam. I can't explain it. Let's just Keep it for a bit? Please. Liam looked at her face, saw the genuine disturbance reflected in her eyes. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. The logical part of his brain screamed overreaction, but the strange atmosphere the drawing evoked was undeniable. Fine, he relented. Keep the creepy kid art. But let's not turn this renovation into a ghost hunt, okay? The wiring in the attic is scary enough. Chloe didn't reply. She simply stood there, holding the bro page, her gaze fixed on the drawing. The smiling sun, the happy family, the lurking shadow, the still figure, the splash of red. Each element seemed to vibrate with a hidden meaning, a silent story struggling to be told. Why go to the trouble of hiding it deep inside a wall? What secret was so important or so terrifying that it needed to be sealed away in the dark? The question resonated in the dusty air, a discordant note in the hopeful symphony of their new beginning. The old house suddenly felt deeper, its shadows holding more than just dust and time. An inexplicable chill, cold and sharp, traced a path down Chloe's spine, settling like a stone in the pit of her stomach. Something was wrong here, terribly wrong. The drawer became an unwelcome fixture in their lives over the next few days. Liam, trying to normalize it, had carefully tacked it to the exposed wooden laths of the half-demolished office wall. It hung there like a strange, unsettling icon, a focal point of unease in the midst of chaotic renovation. Every time Chloe passed the doorway, her eyes snagged on it. The cheerful elements, the sun, the house, now seemed discordant, almost mocking. The prone figure felt heavier each time she looked, the red patch beside it pulsing with a silent, sinister implication. The lurking figure in the woods seemed to shift in her peripheral vision, its crayon form taking on a shadowy substance it didn't actually possess. Liam, preoccupied with wrestling a stubborn radiator into submission downstairs and mapping out the necessary plumbing upgrades, tried to maintain his pragmatic stance. He reminded Chloe they bought an old house, full of quirks and remnants of past lives. Finding odd things was part of the package, but even he found himself glancing towards the upstairs room more often than necessary, a sliver of disquiet working its way past his logical defenses. The drawing had an undeniable pull, an aura of unhappy significance. Chloe, however, couldn't shake the feeling that the drawing was more than just peculiar. Her graphic design work often involved deciphering visual language, finding meaning in composition and detail. This felt like a message coded in crayon. She found herself spending evenings not scrolling through Pinterest for bathroom tile ideas, but hunched over her laptop, diving down rabbit holes of local history. She meticulously searched Oak Haven property records, tracing the ownership of their house back through the decades. Peterson, Miller, Johnson, names swam before her eyes on scanned documents. Then a name clicked, resonating with a faint sense of familiarity from the older deeds. Harrison. Robert and Linda Harrison. Records showed they owned the property from late 1988 until early 1992, a time frame that fit perfectly with the likely age of the drawing and the style of the paper. Could the Harrisons have had a child? A child who drew this picture? She shifted her search terms, plugging Harrison family Oak Haven, Chestnut Lane 1990s, missing child Oak Haven, into local newspaper archives and online forums dedicated to town history. The digital trail was frustratingly cold. Grainy scans of relevant articles, council meeting minutes discussing zoning laws, advertisements for long-closed businesses. Nothing about a family tragedy, a disappearance, or anything remotely matching the dark undertones of the drawing. It was as if the Harrisons had simply ceased to exist in the public record after leaving Chestnut Lane. A break came unexpectedly a few days later. While battling a particularly stubborn patch of overgrown ivy snaking up the front porch trellis, Chloe saw her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, tending the vibrant blooms in her meticulously kept garden next door. Mrs. Gable was a fixture on the street, a woman whose neatly pinned white hair and sharp, observant eyes suggested she missed very little. After exchanging the usual pleasantries about the unseasonably warm weather and the challenges of unruly ivy, Chloe steered the conversation, trying to sound casual. "We're deep into the renovations upstairs," Chloe mentioned, wiping sweat from her brow. "It's amazing what you find tucked away in these old houses." Mrs. Gable leaned conspiratorially over the low hedge separating their properties, her trowel dangling from her hand. "Oh, indeed? Anything interesting?" "My husband once found a stash of pre-war pennies under a loose floorboard in our pantry." Chloe hesitated, feeling a blush rise on her cheeks. It sounded so fanciful when said aloud. "Well, not quite treasure," she admitted. "Actually, it was a child's drawing, hidden inside one of the bedroom walls, sealed up behind the plaster." Mrs. Gable's friendly smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Her eyes, sharp as ever, seemed to focus on Chloe with renewed intensity. "A drawing? Hidden? How very peculiar." "Yes." Chloe pressed gently, sensing a shift in the neighbor's demeanor. "We were just curious. We found records showing a family named Harrison lived here before the Petersons. Maybe late 80s, early 90s? Did they have children? Do you recall?" The old woman's brow furrowed, her gaze drifting towards Chloe and Liam's house, looking past the peeling paint and focusing on something distant, remembered. "Harrison, yes, I remember them," she said slowly, her voice softer now. "Moved in around, goodness, must have been 88 or 89. Robert and Linda." Her eyes cleared slightly. "And they did have a little girl. A sweet little thing. Always playing out back near the big oak tree they used to have. Emily." "Yes, that was her name. Emily." Chloe felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold confirmation. "Emily, do you remember them well?" Mrs. Gable's expression clouded over again. She began pulling at a non-existent weed near her prize-winning roses, avoiding Chloe's eyes. "Not terribly well. Kept to themselves mostly." She paused, her voice dropping further, becoming almost hesitant. "They didn't stay long, you know. Left rather suddenly." "Suddenly?" Chloe echoed, keeping her own voice carefully neutral. "How do you mean?" Mrs. Gable straightened up, sighing softly. She finally met Chloe's gaze, her eyes troubled. "Well, it was just abrupt. 1 week they were here, the next gone. Poof. No moving van that anyone saw. No goodbyes to the neighbors. The house just stood empty. Mail started piling up on the porch." She shrugged uncomfortably. "Happened sometime in, late 91 or early 92, I think. Everyone just figured they'd packed up and moved on quickly. Job offer somewhere else, maybe? Financial trouble? People whispered, of course. But it seemed odd. They left things behind, apparently. Furniture, some boxes in the attic. Never came back for them." She gave a small, dismissive wave of her hand, but her eyes still held a shadow. "Ancient history now, dear. Probably best not to stir up old neighborhood tales." Chloe thanked her, the casual tone feeling forced. She retreated to her own yard, the ivy momentarily forgotten. Mrs. Gable's words echoed in her mind. The Harrisons. Emily. Left abruptly. Left things behind. It aligned perfectly with the hidden drawing, with the time frame. But it didn't explain the drawing's disturbing content or why it was concealed. Why flee so suddenly? Why hide a child's drawing depicting something potentially horrific? That night, sleep eluded Chloe. The old house seemed to settle around them with unusual weight. Every creak of the floorboards downstairs, every rustle of leaves against the rattling window panes, sounded amplified, sinister. The small room upstairs, still half demolished, felt distinctly colder than the rest of the house, a pocket of chill air that Liam dismissed as a simple draft from the exposed wall cavity. But Chloe wondered. Lying there in the dark, Liam breathing evenly beside her, she could almost feel the presence of the drawing pinned to the laths, its crayon figure seeming to ride in the faint moonlight slanting through the dusty window. The unease she'd felt initially had solidified into a heavy dread, a growing conviction that the history they were uncovering wasn't just forgotten. It was deliberately buried. And finding the drawing was only the beginning. Chloe's focus narrowed, the drawing pulling her deeper into its cryptic narrative. She scanned it into her computer, blowing up the image, analyzing every crayon stroke with the same intensity she applied complex design projects. The figure lying down, those weren't just dots for eyes. Magnified, they were unmistakable X's. The universal childhood symbol for absence, for being gone, for death. A visceral coldness spread through Chloe's chest, tightening her breath. She forced herself to look at the lurking figure by the trees again. The large, circular head, was that just poor proportion, or was it meant to suggest something specific? Glasses? A round face? And the top of the head, flattened, dark a hat? Perhaps a flat cap? The details remained frustratingly ambiguous, blurred by the thick crayon and the passage of time. Yet the feeling it conveyed was undeniable. Stealth, observation, malevolence. Her online searches became laser-focused. No longer content with general history, she tried specific, darker queries. Emily Harrison Oakhaven death, unsolved child murder Oakhaven 1991, body found Chestnut Lane. Each search returned nothing relevant, amplifying the unsettling silence surrounding the family's departure. It felt increasingly impossible. A child vanishes. A family disappears under suspicious circumstances. And there's no significant record, no lingering questions in the official narrative, unless the narrative itself was flawed, unless the truth had been actively suppressed. The real breakthrough came not from the screen, but from the physical world. Standing again in the small, dusty room, Chloe held a printout of the drawing, her gaze shifting between the paper and the view out the window towards their overgrown backyard. The perspective in the drawing felt specific. She lined up the blue house on paper with their actual house outside. The neighbor's fence matched the faint sketch line. Then her eyes locked onto a detail in the drawing. A large, prominent tree positioned near where the figure lay on the ground. An old, spreading oak, perhaps? She scanned their yard. No such tree existed now. But her breath hitched. Right there, in the approximate location indicated by the drawing, partially obscured by a tangle of thorny bushes they hadn't yet cleared, was a wide, flat tree stump, its rings testifying to considerable age. An old tree that had been felled years ago. And just beyond it, near the crumbling back fence line, was a circular stone lip of an old well, covered with heavy, weathered wooden planks. Something they'd noted on the property survey and planned are professionally filled and sealed for safety. The drawing wasn't a generic depiction of a house and yard. It was a map, a chillingly accurate rendering of this specific place, marking a spot near the old oak tree, close to the abandoned well, a location pinpointed by a child who drew herself marked with X's, watched by a menacing figure before she and her family vanished. A wave of nausea washed over Chloe, followed by a surge of cold, hard certainty. This wasn't imagination. It wasn't coincidence. This was a pointer, a desperate finger pointing towards a specific patch of earth in their own backyard. She felt a terrifying mix of fear and grim resolve crystallized within her. "Liam," she called, her voice tight, vibrating with an urgency that cut through the usual sounds of renovation. "Liam, drop what you're doing. We need to go outside. Right now." Liam emerged from the basement, wiping cobwebs and grime from his hands onto his jeans. He looked tired, slightly irritated. "What is it now, Chloe? Did the creepy drawing start talking to you?" "Don't joke," she snapped, immediately regretting her tone, but too consumed by the discovery to soften it. "Look." She thrust the printout at him, her finger trembling slightly as she pointed to the tree, the well, the figure on the ground. "The tree isn't here anymore, Liam, but the stump is exactly where she drew it. And the old well is right there, too. She drew this spot. She marked the spot, and then she disappeared, and they hid the drawing." Her words tumbled out in a rush. "We have to look there. We have to see what's there." Liam stared at the drawing, then looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard, his expression shifting from tired annoyance to dawning comprehension, then deep unease. He saw the stump, the well's location. He saw the intensity, the utter conviction, burning in Chloe's eyes. His skepticism, his pragmatic defenses, crumbled under the weight of the evidence she presented, coupled with the undeniable strangeness of the hidden drawing itself. He still hoped desperately that they'd find nothing more than buried garden tools or old construction debris. But he couldn't ignore this. He couldn't dismiss her fear. "Okay," he said heavily, wiping his hands again, this time with a sense of grim purpose. "Okay, Chloe, grab the shovels from the shed. Let's go look." They walked out into the late afternoon light, the sun casting long, skeletal shadows across the uneven lawn. The air felt thick, unnaturally still, as if the yard itself was holding its breath. Chloe indicated the spot, a few feet from the weathered edge of the oak stump, referencing the drawing clutched in her hand. Liam took the first swing, the shovel blade biting into the soft, dark earth with a sucking sound. They dug in silence, the only sounds a rhythmic scrape and thud of the shovels, the chirping of oblivious crickets, and their own increasingly strained breathing. Minutes stretched into an eternity. They unearthed compacted soil, gnarled roots snaking to the dirt like buried veins, a few shards of broken pottery, a heavily rusted hinge. Hope began to mingle with Liam's lingering skepticism. Maybe it was nothing after all. He paused, leaning on his shovel handle, catching his breath. "Anything yet?" His voice was flat. "No. But we're close, I feel it," Chloe insisted, her voice breathy with effort and adrenaline. She repositioned herself slightly, driving her own shovel deeper, guided by an instinct she couldn't articulate. This was the spot. She knew it. Her shovel blade struck something solid, not the sharp clink of hitting a rock, but a dull, resonant thump. Wood. Soft, yielding wood. Her heart leaped into her throat, hammering violently against her ribs. "Liam, here, I hit something." Dropping his own shovel, Liam scrambled over, kneeling beside her. Together, they abandoned the shovels, using their hands and a small garden trowel Chloe produced from her pocket to carefully scrape away the surrounding soil. Slowly, painstakingly, an object began to emerge in the damp earth. It was rectangular, dark, about 2 feet long and perhaps 18 inches wide. Wood, stained almost black by moisture and time, its surface softened and partially decayed. A box, a small, plain wooden box, deliberately buried beneath the earth, in a precise location indicated by a 30-year-old child's drawing. The air around them seemed to drop several degrees. The ordinary sounds of suburban evening, a distant siren, the laughter of children playing down the street, faded into an oppressive, ringing silence. They stared at the box, then at each other, the same terrifying question reflected in their wide eyes. What secrets, what horrors, had been buried here along with it? With trembling hands, they worked together, gently levering the small, decaying wooden box free from its earthen grave. It felt unnervingly heavy, laden not just with damp soil, but with a palpable weight of secrets and sorrow. They carried it back into the house as if handling unexploded ordnance, setting it gingerly down on sheets of newspaper spread across the scarred surface of their old kitchen table. Up close, it would appeared even darker, almost black in patches, warped and softened by its long decades underground. There was no visible lock, just a simple, ill-fitting lid, swollen tightly shut by years of subterranean moisture. Liam fetched a thin putty knife from his toolbox. Sliding the blade carefully into the narrow gap between the lid and the box, he began to work it gently around the perimeter. The wood fibers groaned in protest. With a final, soft tearing sound of decay, the seal broke, and the lid came loose. They both leaned forward simultaneously, peering into the dark interior, holding their breath against the sudden release of stale, earthy air. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like brittle, dried leaves and fragments of faded, patterned fabric, lay not the skeletal remains Chloe had subconsciously braced herself for, but a small collection of childhood relics. A tiny teddy bear, its brown fur matted and discolored, stared up with one remaining black button eye, its expression disturbingly blank. Beside it rested a delicate silver locket, oval-shaped, tarnished to an almost uniform black by time and proximity to the damp earth. A few more pieces of paper lay folded nearby, smaller and seemingly drawn with even more haste than the one found in the wall. Chloe reached in carefully, her fingers brushing against the cold, damp fur of the bear before picking up the folded papers. She unfolded them gently on the newspaper beside the box. These drawings were starker, filled with frantic energy. One depicted the dark, lurking figure from the first drawing, but larger now, standing directly outside a window with large, round glasses, peering into a darkened room. Another showed stick figures inside the house, crudely drawn tears streaming from their eyes, mouths open in silent screams. The sense of fear radiating from these simple images was visceral, chilling. Her attention returned to the locket. It felt unnaturally cold in her hand, heavy with unspoken history. Using her fingernail, she carefully worked at the tiny clasp, scraping away flakes of black tarnish. It sprang open unexpectedly. Inside, miraculously preserved and protected from the surrounding decay, was a tiny, faded photograph, a formal studio portrait, slightly washed out, of a young girl with startlingly bright eyes and a shy, hesitant smile playing on her lips. Dark ribbons were tied neatly into her pigtails. Emily Harrison, seeing her face, so young, so innocent, so undeniably real, shattered the last vestiges of detachment. This wasn't just a strange find, a creepy old house story. This was a profound tragedy. The buried box wasn't a time capsule of happy memories. It was a reliquary of fear, a desperate, secret marker left by or for a lost child. Maybe even a substitute grave. Liam stared numbly at the contents spread out on the table. The pathetic bear, the fearful drawings, the heartbreaking locket. His earlier skepticism felt like a foolish luxury now, completely erased and replaced by a heavy, nauseating certainty. "Okay," he breathed, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. "Okay, this is way beyond us." He looked at Chloe, his face pale, his eyes mirroring the horror and dread she felt pooling in her own stomach. "We have to call someone. The police. Now." Chloe nodded mutely, unable to form words for a moment. The sheer weight of the discovery pressed down on her, the air in the kitchen suddenly thick and hard to breathe. This house, their dream project, was saturated with the residue of unimaginable sorrow. Picking up her phone, her hand shook uncontrollably as she dialed the Oakhaven Police Department's non-emergency line. Explaining the sequence of events felt utterly surreal. Finding the drawing hidden in the wall during demolition, the growing unease, the neighbor's fragmented memories, using the drawing like a macabre map to locate the buried box, the locket containing the photo of a little girl named Emily Harrison, who supposedly moved away 30 years ago. She fought to keep her voice steady, to sound coherent. But the image of Emily's bright, hopeful eyes staring out from the tarnished locket burned behind her own. It didn't take long. Within 30 minutes, the quiet tranquility of Chestnut Lane was broken by the arrival of a marked patrol car, its lights off but its presence commanding attention. Shortly after, a nondescript sedan pulled up behind it. A man in a slightly rumpled suit, looking weary but alert, emerged and introduced himself as Detective Miller. His eyes, though tired, seemed to miss nothing as they scanned Liam and Chloe, the kitchen, the box on the table. He listened with quiet intensity as Chloe, occasionally prompted by Liam adding a forgotten detail, recounted the entire story, starting with the crowbar hitting something soft in the wall. Detective Miller examined the initial drawing first, handling the brittle paper with professional care, his gaze sharp. He noted the details Chloe highlighted, the prone figure with the X eyes, the dark red patch suggesting violence, the distinct lurking figure near the woods, the subtle hints of glasses, and a flat hat. His expression remained largely impassive, but Chloe thought she detected a flicker, a subtle tightening around his eyes, when she mentioned the Harrisons and the neighbor's account of their abrupt departure. He then carefully inspected the contents of the box, the bear, the locket, Emily's photo, the other fearful drawings. He picked up the locket, turning it over in his gloved hand. Harrison, Miller murmured, the name seeming to stir something in his memory. Emily Harrison. That name, it rings a bell. Very faint, very old. He looked from the drawing to the pitiful contents of the box, then back at Chloe and Liam, his gaze lingering on their pale, anxious faces. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor, she said they left suddenly, around late 91, early 92. Yes, Chloe confirmed, her voice barely more than a whisper. She said it seemed strange, but everyone just assumed they'd relocated, that they just moved away. Miller nodded slowly, his eyes distant for a moment, lost in thought. Sometimes, he said quietly, his voice gravelly, assumptions are the most dangerous things. He carefully began placing the drawing and the items from the box into separate, labeled evidence bags. We have cold case files downstairs, boxes and boxes of them. Unexplained disappearances, files gathering dust. Most lead nowhere. People move on, start new lives, forget to tell anyone. He paused, sealing the bag containing the locket with Emily's picture. He met their eyes, his expression now unequivocally serious. But this feels different. Hiding a drawing like this, burying these items, this was deliberate. This was concealment. His tone shifted, losing any remaining trace of detachment, replaced by the focused energy of an investigator latching onto a scent, no matter how cold. I need to take all of this back to the station, pull the old files, cross-reference everything, the names, the dates, the neighbor's original report if there was one, the details in this drawing. He held up the bag with the first drawing. Thank you for calling this in immediately. You absolutely did the right thing. As Detective Miller and the uniformed officer departed, taking Emily Harrison's hidden testament with them, a profound silence descended upon the house on Chestnut Lane. The half-finished renovation seemed utterly insignificant now, the house itself feeling less like a project and more like a silent witness holding its breath. Liam put a comforting arm around Chloe's shoulders. They stood motionless by the kitchen window, staring out the patch of disturbed earth near the ancient oak stump, now marked by small, incongruous yellow police flags fluttering faintly in the evening breeze. The mystery was no longer contained within their walls or their minds. It had escaped into the world, into the hands of the law. And deep down, both Liam and Chloe felt a chilling premonition. The secrets Detective Miller was about to uncover in those dusty basement archives would not bring peace, but a confirmation of the horror they had unearthed in their own backyard. Deep in the bowels of the Oak Haven Police Department, Detective Miller navigated the dimly lit, musty aisles of the basement archives. The air hung thick with the scent of decaying paper, dust, and the faint, metallic tang of old filing cabinets. Rows upon endless rows of identical cardboard boxes stretched into the gloom, each filled with the documented sorrows and transgressions of the town's past. He moved with purpose, searching the shelves marked for the early 1990s, specifically looking for missing persons reports, suspicious circumstances, anything related to the Harrison family or Chestnut Lane. It was a slow, painstaking process, flipping through brittle folders, deciphering faded handwriting on intake forms. Finally, tucked away in a box labeled Unresolved/Closed 1992, he found it. A thin, unassuming manila folder. The label, typed on an old machine, read, Harrison, Emily Sarah. Status, closed, believed relocated with family. Miller carried the folder back to a small, cluttered desk under a flickering fluorescent light and opened it carefully. The documents inside were sparse, telling the official, accepted version of events. Emily Harrison, age 7, reported missing by a concerned neighbor. Miller noted the name Agnes Gable. In February 1992, the initial report detailed Mrs. Gable's worry, having not seen the usually active child playing outside for nearly a week. Patrol officers made inquiries. Robert and Linda Harrison, the parents, were eventually reached at their respective workplaces after initial difficulty. Their story, recorded concisely by the reporting officer, was that Emily was temporarily staying with Linda's sister out of state due to an unspecified family illness. A few days later, Mrs. Gable and other neighbors reported the house suddenly vacant. Mail accumulated. Utilities were shut off for non-payment. A cursory follow-up investigation found the house empty, signs of hasty departure. With no concrete evidence of foul play, and the parents now unreachable, the missing person report was eventually closed, logged, and filed away under the assumption the family had simply moved on, perhaps fleeing debts or seeking a fresh start. Case closed. Forgotten. Miller scowled, rubbing his tired eyes. It felt too easy, too clean, especially juxtaposed against the visceral fear captured in Emily's hidden drawings and the deliberately buried box of her most precious belongings. He reread the initial witness statements attached to the report. Mrs. Gable's account from 1992 was more detailed than her recent conversation with Chloe suggested. Back then, she had explicitly mentioned hearing frequent, loud arguments emanating from the Harrison house in the weeks preceding their disappearance. She described Robert Harrison as having a short fuse and being intimidating, while Linda Harrison seemed constantly on edge, frightened. Another neighbor, now deceased, had reported seeing an unfamiliar man hanging around the periphery of the Harrison property on several occasions during the late summer and fall of 1991. This man was described as possibly transient, often wearing noticeable eyeglasses and a distinctive flat cap. He had apparently done some odd jobs, gardening, gutter cleaning, for a few homes on Chestnut Lane that year. Miller's blood ran cold. He stared intently at the clear plastic evidence bag containing Emily's first drawing, the lurking figure, the large, circular head suggesting glasses, the flat shape on top resembling a hat. The 30-year-old witness description of the unidentified handyman matched the sinister figure in the child's drawing with chilling accuracy. This wasn't just a boogeyman from a nightmare. This was a real person. Emily had drawn someone she had seen, someone who frightened her. He plunged back into the archives, searching now for any records pertaining to transient individuals questioned or arrested in Oak Haven around 1991 to 1992. His fingers, smudged with dust, finally landed on a brief field interrogation report from October 1991. A handyman matching the description had been stopped and questioned regarding a minor theft from a garage down the street from the Harrisons. Name: Frank Chilton. Address listed as no fixed abode. Chilton had vehemently denied any involvement in the theft. He had no significant prior record at the time, with no evidence linking him to crime, and no other reason to hold him. He was released. A quick check of regional databases showed no further official contact with Frank Chilton in Oak Haven or any adjacent counties after early 1992. Like the Harrisons, he too seemed to have vanished right around the same time Emily disappeared. The pieces slammed into place in Miller's mind, forming a sickening, ugly picture. Emily's drawing wasn't just a child processing fear. It was a critical piece of overlooked evidence. A silent witness statement, tucked away in desperation, or perhaps even placed there by a terrified Linda Harrison. Emily likely never left Chestnut Lane. The drawing of the figure with X's for eyes wasn't a metaphor. It was a depiction of her own fate, or the terrible fate she foresaw. The buried box wasn't a time capsule. It was a secret memorial. The lurking figure, Frank Chilton, must have been involved. Had Emily witnessed Chilton committing a crime? Had he silenced her? Or was the truth even darker? Robert Harrison, described as volatile and intimidating, orchestrating a sudden middle-of-the-night disappearance for his entire family immediately after his daughter vanished and the handyman dropped off the map. It strongly suggested a frantic, brutal cover-up. Perhaps Chilton acted alone, and Robert covered it up to avoid scandal or suspicion falling on himself. Or perhaps Robert was directly involved in silencing his own daughter. Miller felt the familiar weight of a cold case cracking open, the ghosts of the past demanding attention. He needed more than dusty files and a child's drawing. He needed irrefutable proof. He knew his next step wasn't back in the archives, but back on Chestnut Lane. He needed to talk to Mrs. Gable again, armed with this new, terrifying context. And then he needed to return to Liam and Chloe's backyard. Not with shovels this time, but with a search warrant and a full forensic excavation team. The drawing hadn't just marked the location of a buried box. Miller suspected it marked Emily Harrison's hidden grave. The return of the police to Chestnut Lane cast a pall over the neighborhood. This time, there was no quiet discretion. Marked cars blocked the street. Official vehicles lined the curb. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across Liam and Chloe's front yard, cordoning off the entire rear property. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken dread and morbid curiosity. Neighbors gathered on their porches, watching in hushed silence as Detective Miller arrived, accompanied by a team of forensic specialists carrying sophisticated equipment. Ground-penetrating radar, sifters, evidence markers, body bags. Liam and Chloe observed the grim proceedings from their kitchen window, feeling like ghosts in their own home. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a hollow ache of certainty. The renovation was forgotten, the house's potential overshadowed by the tragedy it had harbored for 3 decades. Chloe clutched a mug of cold coffee, her gaze fixed on the activity unfolding near the old oak stump and the capped well. The forensic team worked with methodical precision, dividing the area into grids, carefully removing layers of soil, scanning the earth beneath. Hours crawled by under the unervingly bright afternoon sun. The methodical scrape of tools, the low murmur of voices, the occasional click of a camera shutter. These were the only sounds that punctuated the heavy silence. Every shovelful of earth felt like a violation, yet also a necessary step towards uncovering the final, awful truth. Then, abruptly, the activity ceased. One of the technicians near the old well called out sharply. All movement stopped. A different kind of silence fell, tense, expectant. Detective Miller, who had been conferring with another officer near the back fence, moved quickly towards the excavation site. He knelt beside the technician, peering into the carefully exposed earth. After several long moments, he stood up slowly, dusting soil from his knees. He turned, his face etched with a mixture of profound sadness and grim resolution, and looked directly towards the kitchen window where Liam and Chloe stood watching. He met their eyes across the yard and gave a single, slow, almost imperceptible nod. They had found her, buried not far from where Emily's box of treasures lay hidden, wrapped in remnants of what might have once been a blanket, with a small, delicate skeletal remains of a child. The search was over. The child depicted in the hidden drawing, the bright-eyed girl in the tarnished locket, Emily Harrison, had never moved away with her family. She had been there all along, lying silent in the cold earth of her own backyard for 30 years, her story waiting patiently, desperately, to be unearthed. The subsequent forensic analysis confirmed the identity. Emily Harrison, age 7. Cause of death, after 3 decades, was difficult to determine definitively, but evidence suggested blunt force trauma. The reopened investigation gained momentum, piecing together the fragmented narrative of Emily's last days. Frank Chilton, the handyman depicted as a lurking figure in Emily's drawings, remained an enigma, a ghost in the system. He had effectively vanished in early 1992, leaving no trail, likely fleeing Oak Haven immediately following Emily's death. His role, primary perpetrator, accomplice, or merely a terrifying witness Emily drew, remained frustratingly unclear. Investigators eventually tracked down Robert and Linda Harrison. They had divorced many years prior and were living vastly different lives under changed names in separate states, hundreds of miles apart. Robert Harrison, when confronted, was hostile, evasive, sticking rigidly to the implausible story of a sudden relocation for work opportunities, denying any knowledge of Emily's fate beyond claiming she died years later from illness. His aggressive stonewalling offered no path to the truth. Linda Harrison, however, was a different story. Tracked down to a small apartment where she lived a quiet, solitary life, she seemed broken by decades of silence, guilt, and fear. In a series of emotional interviews with Detective Miller, she haltingly confessed parts of the story. She spoke of Robert's volatile temper, the oppressive atmosphere of fear in the house, and Chilton's unsettling presence. She confirmed Emily had been deeply disturbed by Chilton, suggesting the child might have witnessed him involved in something, perhaps the petty theft he was questioned about, or something far worse. Linda heavily implied, without explicitly stating, that Robert, consumed by rage or fear of exposure, was responsible for silencing Emily permanently after a confrontation, possibly involving Chilton. Robert then orchestrated the entire disappearance overnight, coercing Linda into silence through threats and manipulation. Chilton, she believed, had been paid off or threatened into fleeing and never returning. But without Chilton's testimony, and with Robert refusing to confess, securing a conviction for murder after 30 years proved impossible. Justice for Emily remained incomplete, fractured by time, silence, and fear. For Liam and Chloe, life in a house on Chestnut Lane was irrevocably altered. The thrill of renovation, the dream of building a future there, felt tainted, overshadowed by the knowledge of what had happened within its walls and beneath its soil. The small room upstairs, where the drawing had waited patiently in the dark, remained untouched, half demolished. Neither of them could bear to finish it, to occupy the space that felt sacred to Emily's memory, the place where her silent cry had finally been discovered. They continued working on other parts of the house, slowly, mechanically, but the joy was gone, replaced by a pervasive sense of sorrow and unease. They considered selling, moving away, but felt strangely bound to house, custodians of its sad history. The story resonated through Oakhaven, a chilling local legend born from a child's crayon drawing. It became a stark reminder that the most ordinary places can conceal the deepest darkness, that secrets can lie dormant for decades just beneath the surface of quiet suburban life. Emily Harrison's voice, tragically silenced 30 years earlier, had finally echoed through time, carried on a brittle piece of paper found by chance. Yet, the silence surrounding the full truth persists. What exactly did Emily see? What became of Frank Chilton, the figure lurking in the woods of her drawing? And what specific role did Robert Harrison play in the final, terrible moments of his daughter's life? Some answers remain buried, perhaps forever lost to time, leaving only the haunting image of a child's drawing, the cold weight of unearthed secrets, and the unsettling realization that the past is never truly gone sometimes. It's just waiting inside the walls.